Hello my loves, welcome back. Today I want to talk about some of my favourite books of all time. I think it was about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit longer, I did a video with my good friend Becky where we talked about our top 3 favourite books of all time. I was thinking back on it the other day, and when I made that video, I hadn't really been like fully back into reading for very long. I hadn't read like a huge amount in comparison to how much I've read now, and I think I was still like learning my reading tastes and what I enjoyed. I just thought it would be interesting to see my opinions on those books now and whether that list has changed. I am cheating a little bit because I don't think that I could just narrow it down to like 3 books now that I love above everything else. I think back then I could because I hadn't read as much as I have now over the past like year or so. I'm cheating. I'm gonna do 5 this time. I think the main thing I want to see is if any of those books from previously will still be on that list. I already have an idea of whether some of them will be or not, so you'll just have to see if they stick around or if the list has changed and removed any of them. If we look back to 6 months ago when I first made this video, my top 3 books at that time were Six of Crows, The Mad Woman's Ball, and The Picture of Dorian Gray. And that is in no particular order. Those were just the books at that time that I said were my top 3 favourites. Looking at how I feel about those books now, if we start with The Mad Woman's Ball, I did really enjoy this book, and it's still tagged as one of my favourites on Goodreads, but I really don't think it would still count as one of my favourite books of all time. It essentially is set in 19th century France, I think, in a hospital for women who are experiencing a multitude of different problems, things like epilepsy, hysteria, things like that, and the creation of like hypnosis being used for treatment at that time. It's very much focused on the way women were treated back then, how women who just didn't fit societal views were just labelled as being hysteric and sort of put in a hospital. It does very much have a feeling of women coming together and trying to protect each other or help each other, but it is still quite sad and quite difficult at times. It's a really good book, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed it, but I think now, having read more, I'm gonna say it wouldn't get a place on the top 5, let alone the top 3. Yeah, we'll see. The next one, Six of Crows, is very easy for me to say whether this would remain on the list or not. I'm not gonna tell you what Six of Crows is about because I think most people will already know. Six of Crows is easily one of my favourite books of all time, and I think it's always gonna stay on this list, just as a spoiler alert for when we get to the updated list. It's fantastic. Those characters have stayed with me since I read it. They will live with me in my heart always. I love the world, the characters, the plot. It's fantastic. I don't think that book is ever gonna be lower than top 3 or top 5. Six of Crows is still like the standard that I use for whether I'm gonna rate something 5 stars or not. If I enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed Six of Crows, it's 5 stars. If I didn't, it's not 5 stars. It's like a metric that I use still. I don't think anyone will be surprised by that though. I talk about Six of Crows all the time. It's a fantastic book. And then the last one, The Picture of Dorian Gray, is the one I'm like a bit more on the fence about. I will always say this is one of my favourite books. However, this book being included in the top 3, I'm not sure if I would still do that. I'm not even sure if it's gonna make the top 5. Hear me out. Dorian Gray was potentially the first classic I read when I was getting back into classics and allowing myself to start reading them again after a long time of not really reading them. It is very good, don't get me wrong. It is quite easy to read. A lot of very nice writing in it. It was just so enthralling. I read it in one sitting because I just couldn't put it down. It is still definitely up there as one of my favourite books. However, I think I've read other books since that have left more of an impact on me than that book did. I'm so unsure whether this is gonna stay top top 5 or not. Those were the books that I included last time and how I feel about them now. If we look at what I would say are my top 5 books now, these are not in order of like, this is number 1, this is the best book I've ever read. This is just, I can't do that. I can't put them in order. This is just generally my top 5 books of all time. Six of Crows is still going to be on that. I've already said that. We don't need to go over that. Six of Crows is always going to be on that list. So let's just get that out of the way that that's still there. Thinking about it more and looking through the books I've marked as like favorite on Goodreads, I think Letters to a Young Poet would also definitely have to be on there. I read that at the beginning of this year and I said as soon as I'd read it, this is maybe going to be the best book of the year. And I read it in January, so it's really short, it's not fiction, it is just, I think it's something that everyone should read, and it left such a like profound mark on me, and there are still certain letters in it that I think about regularly, and it has really affected the way I think about things and also feel about things and allow myself to feel about things. I've been kind of going on, without getting too deep, a bit of a mental health journey over the past year, and I think that book was actually a very important part of it. That definitely has to be up there easily. That is a book that I will come back to regularly. It's really, really short. You can read it in like one sitting easily, so definitely would recommend. And then moving away from that, another classic that I only read really recently but is instantly gone up there. I knew it was gonna be one of my favorite books ever within like the first few chapters, and that is Crime and Punishment. I waffled nonsensically about this book in my March and April wrap up. I had literally only just finished reading it at the time and I hadn't really processed my thoughts around it yet. However, that book is, I think, one of the few books that I would give anything to be able to read again. Like, forget what happens in it, be able to read it again for the first time. I was gutted when it was over. I wish it had been longer. I wanted to reread it like as soon as I'd finished it, and I never feel like that about books. Never. That has definitely come storming into the list, and I think it would be very difficult for anything to take it off that list. I think that will be, that's up there with Six of Crows. Those two are sort of almost on a level footing. I know I said I wasn't gonna like actually rank them, but those two are definitely on a level footing. We've done 3 books there, and that's already very different from my previous one. In terms of the additional 2, one I'm very sure about, and then the last one I'm still really on the fence about. So the one that I'm sure about is If We Were Villains. If We Were Villains was everything that I had wanted The Secret History to be, and I know that's an unpopular opinion, and I know that there's some people who firmly love The Secret History and think it's far better than If We Were Villains, and vice versa. I am one of the people that enjoyed If We Were Villains more personally, and I know they're 2 separate books in their own rights. You can enjoy both of them or hate both of them or whatever, but they are quite similar in terms of theme, the atmosphere and all of that, so it's natural that they are going to be compared. I just heard so much hype about The Secret History and I'd never understood it, and even though I do have more favourable opinions towards it now rather than when I first read it years ago, If We Were Villains is just what I had expected The Secret History to be. In my opinion, it has really good characters that are still complex and morally ambiguous but more likable than the ones in The Secret History. I personally found the Shakespearean setting and focus of study more relatable and interesting than the classics focus of study in The Secret History. I just generally enjoyed the plot more. I felt like the plot flowed better. I felt a lot of the time like The Secret History was just quite slow, but it was good vibes. Like The Secret History, yeah, maybe it was really like, you know, there were just chapters of Richard being sad and walking along in the snow, but there were good vibes and atmosphere in it, to be fair. But comparisons aside, If We Were Villains made me cry, it made me laugh, it again had great characters that I could latch on to, really enjoyed the plot, and just immediately when I finished it, I think it was another one that I was like, yeah, this is going up there straight away. This is immediately one of my favorite books. That's easy to put on there. The number 5 slot or spot is what I'm struggling over a little bit more. And I'm really sorry, but it is another classic. It's between 2 classics, and I'm pretty sure there's 3 classics on this list. I'm just in my insufferable classics era. I'm really sorry. I know, but I can't help it. I love these books. It is either between Dorian Gray or Dracula. And now the interesting thing to me about this is Dracula is the only book in this like list, in this discussion, that I did not rate 5 stars. I rated 4 stars because I was generally frustrated with the plot a lot of the time, and how slow and around the houses everything was, and how Van Helsing would just go on these long rants that he really didn't need to go on, and also just how incompetent every single man in that book was, but they still somehow managed to defeat Dracula. I was generally quite frustrated throughout, and I didn't like a lot of the men in it. However, I did really enjoy it. I got so like drawn into it, and I remember sitting there reading it and just having a great time. It was just one of those books where you forget you're even reading, you forget the outside world, you are just solely in the world of that book. That was how I felt when reading Dracula, and I've been searching for a vampire book like it ever since, and have still not found one. Some people have recommended some to me, so I do need to read them and check them out. I was so into that book, even though I was frustrated a lot of the time. It really like kept me interested, and I really enjoyed the experience of reading it. Dorian Gray was very similar. I wasn't necessarily frustrated with anyone. I didn't really have as many strong emotions while reading it as I did Dracula, but I also just couldn't stop reading it. I couldn't put it down. I really wanted to know what happened, apart from that one chapter that everyone just agrees was really boring. That one chapter that's supposed to be like 20 years of Dorian's life, and it's just about like fabric or something. I can't remember what it's about. Aside from that chapter, it was so easy to read. I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. I really enjoyed it, and the ending left me like speechless, and I had to sit there and think for a really long time afterwards. Retrospectively, I think maybe Dracula does deserve a higher rating than 4 stars. I think I maybe enjoyed it more than I thought I did at the time, but it's really hard to pick between those two. Like really hard, because they're at a very similar level to me, but I don't necessarily want to cop out and just say, oh, it was both of them. You know? So I think if we were to just refresh it as like top 3 books, like fully commit to the previous list, it would be 6 of Crows, Letters to a Young Poet, and Crime and Punishment. That would be the updated top 3, so very different from previously. The question is now whether Dorian Gray makes it to top 5 as well, or if it doesn't. My gut instinct is that it doesn't, which is really sad because I love that book, and it's one of the first ones that I'll mention when people ask what my favourite books are. And I love Oscar Wilde. My gut instinct is just that I enjoyed the experience of Dracula more, and it did create more emotion in me, and therefore I felt more invested in it because the emotion was there. My instinct is that Dorian gets knocked off the list, which I'm really not happy about, and I feel like I'm betraying myself and Oscar Wilde in doing that. That's just what feels right. Dracula, the only 4-star book on this list, managed to get above a 5-star book, which just shows that really ratings aren't everything. Ratings can't capture everything when it comes to books. I think that's my updated list. In 6 months to a year's time, this list may once again be very different, but I think that's where I'm sitting on it right now. I would love to know what your top books of all time are. You know, it doesn't need to be top 5 or top 3, whatever. Your top books of all time, I would love to know, because I think that can tell you very much what that person enjoys and gives you a good look into like their preferences and habits as a reader. So if you would like to share just your top favorite of all time, or like a few different favorites of all time, please do share in the comments. Be nice to each other about each other's favorite books, because it's a very important and personal thing. I look forward to updating this again at some point in the future, because I'm sure it will change, you know. There's so many books out there to read and so many different worlds to experience that it's impossible for a list like this to be concrete. The only thing I'm sure of saying is that Six of Crows will always be on this list. I'm like 80% sure Crime and Punishment will be as well, but I'm saying with 100% certainty that Six of Crows will always be on that list. So if that ever changes, that's gonna be a shock twist of events. That is all from me today. I hope wherever you are, you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.